There's a question that sits at the bottom of every woman who has ever been left. Not asked out loud. Never. But it's there. Quiet, patient, and devastating. What's wrong with me? Not, why did he leave? Not, what happened? But, what is wrong with me? And the cruelest part? Nobody chooses to ask it. It just moves in one day after someone walks out the door, and it never quite unpacks its bags and leaves. Laurel Page was 34 years old, and she had been asking that question since she was 9. She had asked it the morning her father left a note on the kitchen table. Handwritten, 4 sentences, addressed to the family. As if they were a business he was dissolving. She had asked it at 19, after the boy she thought was different kissed her goodbye at a bus terminal and never called again. That she had asked it at 26, when a man she had built a whole life around chose his career, and another woman, over her. And she had asked it quietly in the dark of her apartment at 34, eating cereal for dinner, convinced that this was just how her story went. Men came. Men stayed just long enough for her to exhale. And then they left. Every single one. So she stopped exhaling. She stopped letting anyone close enough to matter. She stopped hoping. She had a good job, a small apartment with good light, a cat named Biscuit, and a carefully constructed wall around her heart that she called independence. It worked mostly. Until the morning a beat-up blue pickup truck broke down in front of her building. Until a man in a gray hoodie knocked on her door because she was the only unit with a light on at 6 a.m. Until a little girl with 2 uneven pigtails looked up at her with the most trusting eyes she had ever seen and said, "Sorry to bother you, ma'am. My daddy needs to use your phone." This is the story of Laurel Page, a woman who had every reason to keep her walls up, and the one man who was too tired, too honest, and too real to let her. Stay with us. To understand Laurel, you have to understand the house she grew up in. Not the physical house, a 2-story colonial in Dayton, Ohio with a green door and a cracked driveway. That house was fine, ordinary, the kind you'd drive past 100 times without looking twice. No, you have to understand the emotional house, the one that shaped her. Her mother, Diane, was a good woman in the way that exhausted women are often good. Quietly, without complaining, but with a kind of resigned grace that looked like strength from the outside, but felt like surrender from the inside. Diane Page had married a charming man, Dennis Page. Tall, funny, the kind of man who could light up a room just by walking into it. He could also disappear from that same room, from their whole lives, just as easily. Dennis worked in sales, which meant he traveled. A lot. But the traveling wasn't really the problem. The problem was that when he was home, he was somewhere else. His eyes were somewhere else. His heart was somewhere else. And then one Thursday morning in October, the rest of him followed. Laurel was 9. Her brother Cal was 6. She remembered coming downstairs for school, and her mother was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her like she was about to say grace. But she wasn't saying grace. She was just sitting, staring at a piece of paper. "Mom?" Diane looked up, and the expression on her face. Laurel would spend the next 25 years trying to forget it. Not grief, exactly. Not even shock. Just this terrible, worn-down recognition. Like some part of her had always known this was coming. Like she had been braced for the impact for years. "Eat your breakfast, sweetheart," her mother said. "You'll be late for school." And that was it. Dennis Page was gone. No dramatic fight. No big confrontation. Just a note. 4 sentences. And a $10 bill left on the counter next to it, which somehow made it worse. Laurel ate her cereal. She went to school. She sat through 3 periods before she started crying in the bathroom and couldn't stop. She didn't tell anyone why. Here's what leaving does to a child that nobody talks about enough. It doesn't just hurt them. It teaches them. It teaches them, in the most visceral, cellular way possible, what love looks like, what it costs, what it ends in. And Laurel learned her lesson well. She learned that men, no matter how present they seem, are always half gone already. That the warmth of someone beside you is borrowed, not kept. That you should never, ever build anything on a foundation that can get up and walk away. She watched her mother date twice after Dennis. Both times ended badly. Not dramatically. No affairs, no blow-up arguments, just that same quiet thing. Men who faded. Men who stopped calling. Men who, one by one, confirmed what Laurel had already started to believe. By high school, she was sharp, funny, and the kind of girl everyone liked, but nobody quite reached. She had friends, but she kept them at a pleasant distance. She dated, but she never committed. Always found a reason to pull back right before things got real. She told herself she was being smart, careful. She had seen what happened when you trusted someone completely, and she had decided the cost wasn't worth it. College didn't change that. If anything, it gave her more ammunition. Her freshman year, she fell for a boy named Kevin. Really fell. The kind that surprised her, that snuck past all her defenses because she hadn't been watching carefully enough. He was pre-med, serious, sweet. They dated for almost a year. And then his family moved him to a school closer to home, and he looked at her over a plate of untouched pasta at their favorite restaurant and said, I think we should be realistic about this. Realistic. She remembered nodding, smiling even, telling him she understood. She waited until she was in her dorm room with the door locked to fall apart. And then she cried for exactly one night. And the next morning she got up, went to class, and quietly cemented the belief she had been building since she was 9 years old. Men leave. That's what they do. That's who they are. By 34, Laurel had made something of herself that she was genuinely proud of. She was a senior account manager at a mid-sized marketing firm in Portland, Oregon. She was good at her job, better than good. She had a reputation for being reliable, perceptive, and ruthlessly organized. Her clients loved her. Her co-workers respected her. Outside of work, she'd built a quiet, self-sufficient life. Might yoga 3 mornings a week. Farmer's market every Saturday. A standing dinner with her 2 closest friends, Bette and Claudine, every other Thursday. She read a lot. She cooked well. She had a balcony garden with herbs she actually used. And she had Biscuit, a fat, opinionated tabby cat who had been her companion for 6 years and who, she privately believed, understood her better than any human she had ever dated. It was a good life. She said that to herself often enough that it had stopped being something she noticed and had become something she just believed. It's a good life. Was she lonely? She would have told you no. She would have told you she was selective. She would have said she had learned from experience what worked for her and what didn't. She would have been charming and funny and totally convincing. And she would have been lying. Not maliciously. Not even consciously, really. But in the way that people who have been protecting themselves for a long time learn to believe their own story. Because the alternative, the truth underneath it, is just too heavy to carry around every day. The truth was that some nights, she lay in her perfectly arranged apartment, with Biscuit purring on the pillow beside her, and she felt an ache so quiet and so deep, she didn't have a word for it. Not loneliness exactly. Something older than that. Something that went all the way back to a 9-year-old girl sitting at a kitchen table eating cereal, watching her mother stare at a piece of paper. The truth was that she was still waiting for someone to prove her wrong. She just didn't believe it was possible anymore. Patrick Callum was not the kind of man you'd look at and think, there goes someone who has it all figured out. and he would be the first to tell you that. He was 38, a little worn around the edges, with calloused hands and a smile that took a second to arrive, but when it did, was completely worth waiting for. He was the kind of man who fixed things. Not metaphorically, literally. He was a licensed electrician, ran a small one-man operation called Callum Electric, and had built it from nothing over 9 years into something modest but real. Enough work to keep busy. Enough income to keep the lights on. He drove a 2011 Ford F-15. Oh, that had been paid off for 3 years and had 190,000 miles on it. He lived in a rental house in a neighborhood that was just barely on the right side of the one that was going downhill. He shopped at Costco on Sundays, cooked most of his meals from scratch because it was cheaper, and went to bed most nights by 10 o'clock because his daughter Rosie woke up every morning at 6 sharp, whether he was ready or not. Rosie. That's where you have to start to understand Patrick. Rosie Callum was 5 years old, and she was, without question or competition, the single best thing Patrick had ever done with his life. She had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness and a laugh that could rearrange the furniture. She loved dinosaurs, the color orange, and a stuffed elephant named Captain Ears that she had carried everywhere since she was 2. Her mother, Sandra, had left when Rosie was 18 months old. And not left, not abandoned Rosie, but left Patrick. Left the marriage, left Portland and moved to Phoenix with a man she'd met at a work conference. A man who had a bigger life than the one she and Patrick were building together. Patrick had seen it coming, if he was honest. Not the specific man, not the specific conference, but the distance. The way Sandra had started looking at their life like she was standing outside a window, watching it already half elsewhere. He hadn't fought it. He had tried. At first. Couples counseling, long conversations, all of it. But you can't make someone want to stay. He had learned that much from his own father, who had spent years trying to make Patrick's mother love a life she didn't want, and it had hollowed him out in the process. So when Sandra said she wanted a divorce, Patrick had nodded, and he had asked one question. What do you want to do about Rosie? What followed was 9 months of lawyers and negotiations, and ultimately, a custody arrangement that gave Rosie 6 months in Portland with Patrick and 6 months in Phoenix with Sandra. It wasn't perfect. Patrick hated the months Rosie was gone with a physical intensity that surprised him. A raw, constant ache in his chest that he managed by working too much and sleeping too little. But it was fair. And Patrick was nothing if not committed to fair. The night before the broken truck and the knocked-on door and the little girl with uneven pigtails, Patrick had just gotten Rosie back. She'd been in Phoenix for 6 months. 6 months. And the moment she came off the plane and ran across the arrivals terminal and launched herself at him with the full force of her 37 pounds, he had held on for a long time. Long enough that the people walking past had given them looks, and he hadn't cared even a little. He had loaded her and her bags into the truck and driven home through a light Portland rain, listening to her talk. Non-stop, rapid fire, catching him up on 6 months of her life in the span of a 20-minute drive. Miss Patty's dance class. A boy at school named Finn who she didn't like because he always cut in line. A gecko she had seen in Sandra's backyard and wanted desperately to keep. A dream she'd had about a castle with a swimming pool inside it. He had listened to every word. He had asked follow-up questions. He had been so full of her, of having her back, that he hadn't noticed until they were almost home that the truck was making a sound it shouldn't. A grinding, low, ominous sound. He had pulled into the street outside his building just as the engine coughed and died completely. He'd sat for a moment, staring at the dashboard. Then he'd looked at Rosie in the rearview mirror. She was still talking about the gecko. He had no roadside assistance. His phone was at 4% battery. It was 5:55 in the morning. He was parked outside an apartment building he didn't live in. He'd overshot his turn by 2 blocks because he'd been listening to Rosie. And the street was completely empty. Except for one apartment window, 3 floors up, that had a light on. "Okay, Bug," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Stay in the truck for 2 minutes. I need to go ask someone for help." Rosie looked at him. "Can I come?" He hesitated. Then, "Yeah, come on." Laurel was already awake. She was always awake at 6, not by choice in any joyful sense, but because her body had long since decided that sleeping past 6 was something other people did. She had made coffee. She was sitting at her kitchen table in an old college sweatshirt and pajama pants, reading a book and pretending the silence didn't have weight. Biscuit was on the windowsill, watching the street below with the focused intensity he normally reserved for birds. When the knock came, she startled badly enough to slosh coffee on her book. Nobody knocked at 6 in the morning. Nobody knocked on her door at all, really, except for Bet when she forgot her key, and Bet always called first. She went to the door and looked through the peephole. A man, tall, gray hoodie, and standing slightly in front of him, barely visible at peephole level, a small child. She opened the door on the chain. "Hi," the man said immediately, hands slightly raised, not in a menacing way, but in the way of someone who understood he was a stranger showing up at dawn and wanted to make it clear he was aware of how that looked. "I am so sorry to bother you. My truck broke down right outside. I saw your light on. I just need to use a phone for 2 minutes. I'm trying to call a tow truck." He had an honest face. That was her first thought. Not handsome, exactly, though he was that too, but honest. Like whatever he said, it would be what he meant. The small child stepped forward from behind his hip. She was maybe 4 or 5 years old, Aj with 2 pigtails that had clearly been attempted with care and achieved with limited success. One was higher than the other. She was wearing a purple jacket over pajamas with little foxes on them, and she was clutching a stuffed elephant to her chest. She looked up at Laurel with enormous, completely earnest eyes. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am," she said. The formality of it, "ma'am," from someone so small was almost comically solemn. "My daddy needs to use your phone. Our truck stopped working." Laurel looked at the child for a long moment. Then she took the chain off the door. "Come in," she said. "I'll make you a cup of coffee while you call." His name was Patrick. The little girl was Rosie. She knew this because Rosie introduced herself. Unprompted. Formally. Odd with a small handshake, within approximately 45 seconds of entering the apartment. She also introduced Captain Ears, the stuffed elephant, though she clarified that Captain Ears doesn't really shake hands because of his trunk. Laurel found herself smiling before she'd made a conscious decision to. Patrick stood near the door while she poured coffee, his phone now plugged into her charger. His battery had died, apparently, between the truck and her door. He called the towing company. He called his mechanic. He apologized twice more for the intrusion. He spoke quietly, efficiently, like a man who was accustomed to handling problems without making a fuss about them. Rosie, meanwhile, had discovered Biscuit. La Biscuit, who tolerated exactly 0 strangers and had once hissed at Laurel's own mother, came down from the windowsill and allowed Rosie to pet him within 2 minutes of her sitting cross-legged on the floor and speaking to him in a very serious, confidential tone about Captain Ears. Laurel watched this from the kitchen counter and felt something shift slightly in her chest. She couldn't have named it. She didn't try to. "He never does that," she said. Patrick looked over from where he was standing. He watched his daughter and the cat for a moment. Something moved across his face, quiet pride, warm and unself-conscious. "She has a way with animals," he said. "She has a way with most things, honestly." There was no brag in it, just truth. The tow truck was 45 minutes away. Laurel offered more coffee. Patrick accepted, and he sat at her kitchen table, not comfortably, not presuming anything, sitting the way guests sit when they're aware they're an imposition. And she sat across from him, and without any real plan for it, they started talking. She learned that he was an electrician, that Rosie had just come back from 6 months with her mother in Phoenix, that he'd overshot his turn because he'd been listening to Rosie talk about a gecko and wasn't paying attention. He learned that she worked in marketing, that the cat was named Biscuit because she'd gotten him during a phase of stress baking, that she'd lived in the building for 4 years. It was ordinary conversation. Surface level. The kind you have with strangers when circumstances throw you together. But there was something underneath it. A quality to the exchange. Easy, unforced, or like a door that swings open without squeaking. That was not ordinary at all. She noticed that he listened when she talked, not the performative listening of someone waiting for their turn. Actually listened. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered things she'd said 3 sentences ago and referenced them. She noticed that he was tired. Not physically, or not only physically, but the kind of tired that lives behind someone's eyes when they've been carrying something heavy for a long time and carrying it alone. She didn't ask about it. He didn't offer it. When the tow truck arrived, he stood and thanked her 3 times and apologized once more. And Rosie hugged Captain Ears and said very seriously that it had been a pleasure meeting Biscuit and that she hoped he had a nice rest of his morning. Laurel walked them to the door, and Patrick paused on the threshold and turned back, and he looked at her with that honest face, and he said, "I really am sorry for the intrusion, but thank you, you didn't have to open the door." "No," she said, "I didn't." He nodded. She nodded, and then he was gone down the hallway, Rosie's small hand in his, Captain Ears dangling from the other. Laurel closed the door and stood with her hand on it for a moment. Then she went back to the kitchen, picked up her coffee, cold now, and sat down. Biscuit jumped into her lap and settled. She sat there for a while, not reading, not thinking anything she could articulate, just sitting. She didn't expect to see him again. Portland was a mid-sized city. The odds of crossing paths with a stranger you'd met for 45 minutes at dawn were not nothing, but they weren't high. She went about her week. Work, yoga, farmer's market, dinner with Bet and Claudine. She told Bet and Claudine about the morning, the broken truck, the little girl, the cat's inexplicable friendliness. And Bet said, "That's a meet cute." And Laurel said, "That's a coincidence." And Claudine, who was a therapist and therefore professionally skilled at saying uncomfortable things pleasantly, said, "Interesting that you're distinguishing between the two." Laurel changed the subject, but she thought about it. Not obsessively, not in the way she would have been embarrassed to admit. Just occasionally, the way a small stone in your shoe makes itself known even when you're not thinking about it. She thought about Rosie's handshake, the pigtails, the stuffed elephant's diplomatic immunity from handshaking. She thought about the way Patrick had looked at his daughter when he said she has a way with most things. She did not think about this more than was reasonable. She thought about it constantly. 3 weeks later, she was at the hardware store on a Saturday afternoon. She had a leaky faucet, and she was the kind of woman who preferred fixing things herself rather than waiting for maintenance. And she turned the corner of the plumbing aisle and nearly walked directly into a man in a gray hoodie holding a box of electrical connectors and arguing very gently with a small child about whether orange was a better color than purple. Patrick looked up. Their eyes met. There was a beat. One of those beats that are just slightly too long to be purely casual. And then he smiled. The smile that took a second to arrive. "Well," he said. Well," she said. "The plumbing aisle," he noted. "The electrical aisle," she replied, "which is interesting because I'm looking for plumbing supplies. I could be branching out. Are you?" "No." He held up the electrical connectors. "These are very much electrical." Rosie, who had been watching this exchange with great interest, tugged on Patrick's sleeve. "Daddy," she said, "that's the lady with the cat." Patrick looked down at her. "It is." Rosie looked up at Laurel with the same solemnity she'd applied to their first meeting. "How is Biscuit?" "He's good," Laurel said. "He's been a little dramatic this week, but that's normal for him." "Cats are very dramatic," Rosie said, nodding as though confirming something she'd already known. "They really are." They ended up walking out of the hardware store at the same time. Only they stood for a moment on the sidewalk, where the afternoon sun was making a rare October appearance, and talked for 20 minutes. Then 30. Then Rosie announced that she was hungry and that she wanted a grilled cheese, and Patrick asked, with a casualness that was almost too careful, whether Laurel had eaten lunch. She hadn't. "There's a diner 2 blocks up," he said. "They make a grilled cheese that Rosie is currently ranking as the best thing she's ever eaten, which is high praise." Laurel paused. She felt the familiar thing. The reflex, the slight backward lean, the internal voice that said, "This is how it starts. This is how you get hurt. This is how they get close enough to leave a mark." She felt it, and she recognized it, and then she said, "I could eat." The diner was small and warm and smelled of coffee and griddle. Now, they sat in a booth, Rosie on one side, Laurel and Patrick on the other, which Rosie had arranged with the confidence of someone used to running the logistics of outings. They ordered. They ate. Rosie, over her grilled cheese, told Laurel about her kindergarten class, about a field trip to the pumpkin patch that was coming up, and about the ongoing situation with Finn, the line cutter, whom she had decided to simply ignore until he improved his behavior. Laurel laughed at the Finn strategy. She laughed genuinely, without performance. Patrick watched her laugh, and he did not look away as quickly as he should have. When they said goodbye outside the diner, he asked for her number. Just like that, not with elaborate preamble or rehearsed smoothness. He just said, "I'd like to talk again if that's okay." Not, he paused. "I don't know what I'm asking exactly. I just like talking to you." She looked at him for a moment. She gave him her number. She walked home in the October sun, telling herself it was just a number. It didn't mean anything. She was being friendly. It was nothing. Biscuit was waiting at the door when she got home, indifferent and imperious. She sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling. "It's nothing," she told herself. Her phone buzzed 20 minutes later. A text. "This is Patrick. Rosie wants me to tell you that Biscuit is welcome at her birthday party in March, if he'd like to come. She says he seems like a party cat." Laurel stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, "Tell her he's considering it. He has a very busy social calendar." The response came quickly. She says that's fair, and she respects his time. Laurel put the phone face down on the couch and pressed both hands over her mouth and sat very still. She was smiling so hard it almost hurt. They texted for 2 weeks before they met again for coffee. Not carefully, not strategically, but the way two people text when they find the conversation genuinely easy, when they text back and saying nothing wouldn't feel right. Patrick was funny in a dry, understated way that caught her off guard. He asked real questions. He remembered things she'd mentioned casually and brought them up later. She noticed this. She filed it. She tried not to read too much into it. The coffee was at a place she chose, familiar territory, intentional. And Rosie was not there because she was at school. It was the first time they'd been anywhere together that was unambiguously just the two of them, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. They talked for 3 hours. She learned more about him, about how he'd started Callum Electric on a $1,500 personal loan and a lot of late nights, about the custody arrangement and how hard the months without Rosie were, about his own family, a mother in Boise he called every Sunday, a younger sister he was close with. He learned more about her. She told him about her job, her friendship with Bet and Claudine, her balcony garden. She told him about growing up in Dayton. She did not tell him about her father. She was careful about what she offered. But she found that with Patrick, careful felt different than it usually did. Usually careful was a wall. With him, it was more like a door she was keeping closed but not locked. A distinction she noticed but didn't examine too closely. When they left the coffee shop and stood on the sidewalk in the thin November cold, he said, "This was good." "It was," she agreed. "Can we do it again?" She looked at him. That honest face. Those tired eyes with something behind them that wasn't quite hope, but was in the same neighborhood as hope. "Yeah," she said. "We can." They saw each other 7 more times over the next 6 weeks. Coffee, a walk along the river, dinner. Just the two of them, the first time, and then with Rosie, the second. A Saturday afternoon where Rosie talked him into a trip to the Science Museum and talked Laurel into coming too. And Laurel spent 2 hours watching a 5-year-old explain the planets to her father with complete confidence and only a few factual errors. She was careful. She kept reminding herself to be careful. But something was happening that she couldn't quite manage with her usual precision. She was getting used to him. Not in the way you get used to furniture, in the way you get used to light, to a particular quality of warmth that you only notice when it's absent. She found herself thinking about things during the week, something funny that happened at work, an article she'd read, a question she'd been turning over, and automatically cataloging them to tell Patrick. She caught herself doing it and stopped, startled, like she'd walked into a room she hadn't meant to enter. Rosie had attached herself to Laurel with the open, uncomplicated trust of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid of being left. She called her Miss Laurel. She drew her a picture of Biscuit that was mostly orange with some cat-shaped suggestions and presented it with enormous pride. She told Laurel about Captain Ear's backstory in such detail that Laurel now knew more about a stuffed elephant's fictional history than she'd ever expected to know. Laurel had put the drawing of Biscuit on her refrigerator. She told herself it was just a drawing. Bet, who had seen it on a Thursday dinner visit, had simply raised an eyebrow and said nothing, which was somehow louder than anything she could have said. The first time she really saw Patrick, not the surface Patrick, not the competent, steady, quietly funny man who held everything together, was the evening in early December when Rosie had a fever. Laurel had stopped by to drop off a book Rosie had asked about, a dinosaur encyclopedia she'd found at a used bookstore. She'd texted Patrick first. He'd said, "Come by." She found him in the kitchen, phone cradled between his ear and shoulder, holding a thermometer in one hand and a bottle of children's Tylenol in the other, simultaneously talking to what sounded like a nurse hotline and trying to open the childproof cap one-handed. He looked, not panicked, but fraying at the edges. The particular fraying of a person who is holding everything together alone and has been for a long time and is tired. She took the Tylenol from him. She opened it while he finished the call. She poured the correct dose and brought it into the living room, where Rosie was on the couch under 3 blankets looking very small and very miserable. "Hi, Ian, Miss Laurel?" Rosie said, in a voice reduced to a hoarse whisper by the fever. "Hi, Bug," Laurel said. She'd heard Patrick use the word, and it had slipped out naturally before she could decide whether that was appropriate. "I brought you something." She held up the dinosaur encyclopedia. Rosie's eyes lit up with what little energy she had. "You stay right there," Laurel said. "Tylenol first, then I'll read you some dinosaur facts." She read to Rosie for 45 minutes, until the fever broke enough that Rosie fell asleep mid-sentence about pterodactyls. She carried the book back to the kitchen, where Patrick was leaning against the counter with his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching her with an expression she had never seen on anyone's face before. She couldn't name it immediately. It took her a moment. It was the look of someone who had been completely seen. Not impressed, not appreciative, seen. Like something in her, Something she hadn't shown him, hadn't planned to show him, had become visible anyway, and he was looking straight at it. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It's a book," she said. "I was passing the store." "Laurel." She stopped. "Thank you," he said again. And this time there was more in it. All the weight of a man who had been doing this alone and knew it and had stopped expecting any help. She stood in his kitchen, holding a dinosaur encyclopedia, and felt the wall she had spent 25 years building develop, very quietly, a crack. Christmas approached. The city strung lights and smelled like pine and cold, and Laurel found herself doing things she did not normally do. She bought Rosie a gift without overthinking whether it was too much. She accepted Patrick's invitation to come for Christmas Eve dinner. Just the three of them, grilled salmon and Rosie's mac and cheese, and a terrible gingerbread house they attempted and largely destroyed. She sat at a kitchen table that was not hers, eating food she hadn't made, listening to Rosie explain the structural failures of gingerbread architecture, and felt, for a terrifying, real, unguarded moment, completely at home. That was the moment it became undeniable. She was falling for him. Had fallen. Was somewhere in the middle of the fall, which is the worst place to be. Far enough down that there's no pretending you aren't falling, not far enough that you've accepted where you're going to land. She drove home that night telling herself to be smart, careful, remember what happens, remember how this goes. But she was having trouble hearing the voice that said those things. It was getting quieter. He was getting louder. She told him about her father in January. She hadn't planned to. They were on a walk, the kind of walk that started as something short and had extended through conversational gravity into something much longer. And he'd mentioned, offhand, that Rosie had gotten a card from her mother in Phoenix, and that navigating Rosie's feelings about Sandra was one of the harder parts of the job. "She loves her mom," he said. "She misses her when she's here, and she misses me when she's there. I can't fix that. I can just show up, every day, show up." And Laurel had said, before she knew she was going to say it, "My dad didn't." Patrick had looked at her, and she had talked. On not everything, not all at once, but the important things. The Thursday morning in October, the 4-sentence note, the way it had rearranged her internal landscape in ways she was still at 34 navigating. He listened. He didn't fix. He didn't tell her that not all men were like that, or that she needed to let it go, or that her father probably had his reasons. He just listened, and at the end, in the cold of a January evening, he said, "That must have made it really hard to trust." She breathed for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "It did." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, simply, without drama, like a fact. She'd looked at him sharply. The words had landed with a weight she hadn't prepared for. "Patrick, I'm not asking you to believe that yet," he said. "I know I haven't earned that. I'm just saying it, putting it on record. Whatever you need to do with it." She didn't know what to say. So she nodded. They walked. The streetlights came on. She thought about his words the rest of the night, and the next morning, and most of the week after that. "I'm not going anywhere." She wanted to believe him so badly it frightened her. February arrived, and with it, the thing that Laurel had been waiting for. Not because she was looking for it, but because part of her had always expected it. Had always known, somewhere underneath the warmth and the walks and the Christmas Eve dinner and the dinosaur encyclopedia, that the other shoe would drop. That this was the part where she was proven right. It started with a phone call. Patrick's sister Dana called with the news that their mother, the one in Boise, the one he called every Sunday, had fallen and broken her hip. She was going to need surgery, and after surgery, significant recovery support. Dana had 2 kids under 4 and couldn't relocate. Patrick was the one with the flexibility, technically, Though flexibility was a generous word for his situation, he came to tell Laurel in person, which she registered even in the middle of what he was saying. He'd come to tell her in person. He sat at her kitchen table, the same table where he'd stood that first morning and asked to use her phone. And he laid it out. His mother needed him in Boise. Rosie's custody schedule meant Sandra was taking her next month regardless. He was looking at the possibility of spending 2 to 3 months in Idaho, helping his mother through recovery. "I have jobs here," he said. "I have to figure out how to handle the work side, but she's my mother." Laurel nodded. She heard everything he was saying. She was processing all of it, and underneath all of it, the old voice was back. "See? This is it. This is the leaving. It always comes." She felt herself going still in the way she did when she was protecting something. That old, careful stillness. "Of course you should go," she said. Her voice was even, professional almost. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. "Laurel, she's your mother," she said. "It's not a question." "I know it's not a question," he said. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking what this does to us." She looked at him. The honest face. The tired eyes. What this does to us. The word "us" had weight she hadn't been expecting. She felt her carefully maintained composure develop more cracks than she was ready to manage. And then she did what she had always done when things got close to the bone. She pulled back. "We'll figure it out," she said. "It's not a big deal." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not what I asked," he said. "Patrick, I'm asking if we're okay. If what we are can handle 2 months of distance. I'm asking because it matters to me. Because you matter to me." He paused. "I need to know if I matter to you." The room was very quiet. Laurel's hands were flat on the table. She could hear her own heartbeat. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say it so desperately she could taste it. Instead, what came out was, "I think maybe we should take some time, while you're in Boise, to figure out what this is." She watched his face. Something there. Something she had never seen before, not on Patrick. Closed down. Just slightly. Just enough. He nodded once. He stood up. He picked up his jacket from the chair. "Okay," he said. And he left. She sat at the table after he'd gone. Biscuit came and sat on the table in front of her, which he was not allowed to do, and she didn't move him. She had done it. She had created the distance herself, preemptively, before he could do it. She had been so afraid of him leaving that she had effectively done it for him. The voice in her head said, "See, you protected yourself." The rest of her said nothing for a long time. Then, very quietly, in a way that was not like thinking, but more like recognizing something you have always known. "You're not protecting yourself. You're doing to him exactly what your father did to you." The thought arrived complete and devastating. She had been so afraid of being left that she had become the one who leaves. She sat with that for a very long time. Patrick left for Boise 3 days later. He texted her when he arrived. Just 3 words. "Made it okay." She stared at the message. She typed, "Good. Give your mom my best." She deleted it. She typed, "I'm glad." She deleted it. She typed nothing and put the phone down and picked it up 11 minutes later and typed, "I'm really glad. I miss you already." She stared at that for a long time. She deleted it and sent, "Good. Safe travels." She hated herself for it immediately. The weeks that followed were quietly miserable in a way that was different from her regular loneliness. This wasn't the low-grade ache of her ordinary life. This was specific. Directional. She missed him. His voice. The particular quality of his attention. The way Rosie explained things as if the world were a very sensible place and she was simply helping you understand it. She went to yoga. She went to work. She had dinner with Bette and Claudine. She did not talk about Patrick, which meant that Bette and Claudine talked about everything else with the careful calibration of people who know something is wrong but are giving you space. Until Thursday night in late February, when Claudine set down her fork and looked at Laurel with the particular steady patience of a woman who had spent 15 years listening to people avoid their own truths. "How long are you going to do this?" she asked. "Do what?" "Punish yourself. And him." Laurel started to say something deflecting. Claudine held up one hand. "You met someone who is good, who is consistent and present and genuinely decent, and who has shown you repeatedly without being asked who he is. And you're sitting here eating risotto and being miserable because you talked yourself out of it before he could disappoint you." She paused. "You know that's what happened, right?" Laurel was quiet. "My dad," she started. "Your dad left. I know." Claudine's voice was not unkind. "And that was a terrible thing that shaped you in ways that are real and valid and not your fault. But Laurel..." She leaned forward slightly. "Patrick is not your father. And you are not 9 years old. And you get to decide right now, at 34, whether that story ends here or whether you write a different one." Laurel stared at the table. "What if he's already done?" she said. The words came out smaller than she intended. Claudine looked at her. "There's only one way to find out." She called him on a Sunday night. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said. His voice was the same, that careful warmth. But there was something guarded underneath it now that hadn't been there before. She had put that there. She knew it. "Hey," she said. Silence. She took a breath. "I owe you something," she said. "I owe you an apology and probably an explanation, in that order." He was quiet. "I got scared," she said. "And when I get scared, I push things away. People. Before they can leave on their own." She paused. "I've been doing it my whole life, and I didn't even really see it until you walked out my door, and I realized I was the one who had sent you away." Silence on his end. She couldn't read it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was wrong. And I know I don't get to just say that and have everything go back to where it was. But I needed you to know." She heard him exhale. "Laurel." "Yeah. I'm not your father," he said. "I know," she said. And then, because it was true and it was time to say it. "I know. That's exactly what I'm afraid of letting myself believe." Another beat. "How's your mom?" she asked. She heard something in his voice shift. Not quite back to where it had been, but movement. A door cracked open again. "She's doing better. She's furious about the physical therapy, which means she's basically back to normal." Laurel laughed, a real one, small and startled and completely genuine. "Good," she said. "Yeah." Silence again, but different this time. "Can we..." she started. "Yes," he said, before she'd finished the sentence. He came home 6 weeks later. He called her from the road, driving back from Boise with his mother's favorite jam in the passenger seat, a promise to Rosie that he was coming, and something lighter in his voice than she had heard in a while. She made dinner. Not a big production. Pasta, salad, the garlic bread she made well. She set the table and lit a candle. One candle, not because she was making a statement, but because the light was nice. And she fed Biscuit, and she sat down, and she waited. He knocked at 8 o'clock. When she opened the door, she didn't say anything clever or carefully measured. She just looked at him for a moment. Standing there in the hallway, tired from the drive, honest face, that smile that took a second. And then she stepped forward and hugged him. Not a greeting hug. A real one. The kind she had not let herself give anyone in a very long time. He held on. They stood there in the hallway for a moment that lasted longer than it should have, and exactly as long as it needed to. "Hi," he said, into her hair. "Hi," she said. Things were not instantly easy. That would be the wrong story to tell. There were conversations that were hard. There were nights when the old voice came back. "This is temporary, don't get too comfortable, remember what happens." And she had to sit with it and choose, deliberately, not to let it run the show. There were moments when Patrick didn't have the emotional bandwidth she needed, because he was managing Rosie's feelings about a custody week that had shifted, or because a big job had gone sideways, or because he was human and people have limits. And she had to learn, was learning, slowly, that those moments were not harbingers of abandonment. They were just Tuesday. She had to learn that staying through the Tuesday moments was what love actually was. Not the grand gestures, not the perfect words at perfect times, but the ordinary, consistent, unglamorous act of showing up. Patrick was good at that. She was learning to be. Rosie's 5th birthday was in March. Laurel came with a gift, a new dinosaur book, a better one this time, and a small treat for Biscuit that Rosie had specifically requested she bring so that Captain Ears could present it to Biscuit at a party she was already planning in her head. The birthday was at a small park, just Patrick and Rosie's 3 best friends from kindergarten and their parents and Laurel. There was a dinosaur-shaped cake. There were orange balloons because it was Rosie's current favorite color. There was a moment, mid-afternoon, where Rosie fell asleep on a blanket on the grass with frosting on her cheek and Captain Ears tucked under her arm. And Patrick sat beside Laurel watching her, and the late March sun came through the trees and he took her hand. Not as a gesture. Just took her hand. Simply, quietly. The way you reach for something that belongs near you. She looked at their joined hands. She looked at Rosie, sleeping in the sun. She felt the ache. The old one. The quiet one. The one she'd been carrying since she was 9. Shift. Not disappear. She was not naive enough to believe it would vanish like a bad dream. But it shifted. Made room. She held Patrick's hand and breathed. There's a version of this story where the lesson is about Patrick, not about what a good man he is, about what it means to find someone consistent and honest and present. And that part is true. He is those things. He remained those things through all of it, through her walls, through her retreat, through the phone call where she finally told him the truth. But that's not the whole lesson. The lesson Laurel Page spent 34 years working toward, the one that cost her sleep and cost her relationships and cost her years of warmth she'd kept behind a wall, was simpler and harder than she'd expected. It wasn't about finding a man who wouldn't leave. It was about becoming a woman who could let herself believe in something. Because here's what she had not understood. All those years when she was being careful and smart and realistic about love, her father's leaving had hurt her. Deeply. Truly, permanently shaped her. That was real. That would always be real. But the story she had built on top of that truth? All men leave. Love always ends. You can't trust anyone. The only safe move is not to play. That story was hers. She had constructed it. Block by block, experience by experience, each new disappointment fitted neatly into the architecture of the belief she'd built at age 9. She had curated her own evidence. She had found men who left because she had chosen unconsciously, men who couldn't quite reach her. She had ended things before they could end her. She had been so committed to not being hurt again that she had become the agent of her own isolation. It wasn't her father's fault. Not really. Not anymore. He had caused the first wound, but she had kept it open. And Patrick. A tired, decent, That beat-up truck-driving single father with calloused hands and an honest face had simply refused to let that wound be the last word. Not by saving her, not by being perfect, not by doing anything dramatic or cinematic, by being there, Tuesday after Tuesday, showing up and meaning it and not disappearing when she pushed back, by coming to tell her about Boise in person, by picking up the phone on the second ring, by taking her hand in a park in March like it was the most natural thing in the world. He had not rescued her. She had rescued herself by finally choosing to let the right person stay. The following October, on a Thursday evening, Laurel sat at a kitchen table. Not hers. Well, hers now in the way that homes become yours. Patrick's kitchen table in a house that was not small and not large, in a neighborhood that was just fine, with a yard that Rosie had immediately declared her domain, and Biscuit had inspected with the cautious approval of someone who had signed off on the move, but was reserving the right to change his mind. Rosie was doing homework at one end of the table, or doing what she called homework, which mostly involved drawing extremely detailed pictures of dinosaurs in the margins of her actual homework. Captain Ears was propped against the salt shaker, observing proceedings with the diplomatic neutrality Rosie had always attributed to him. Patrick was at the stove. He was making pasta. He was also, simultaneously, helping Rosie spell Tyrannosaurus Rex from memory and losing, mildly, because he kept second-guessing the double N. 2 N's, Daddy, Rosie said without looking up from her drawing. We've been over this. I knew it was 2 N's, he said. You said 1. I was testing you. You were not. Laurel watched them. She had a cup of tea and a book, and she was supposed to be reading, but she had read the same sentence 4 times. She was watching a man make pasta for the people he loved. She was watching a little girl correct him with great affection and zero patience. She was watching Biscuit, curled on the window seat, who had chosen this house with the grudging certainty of someone who knows a good thing when they see it. She was watching a life, her life, not the one she had planned, or managed, or constructed from careful components. Not the life she had settled for or resigned herself to or convinced herself was fine. A life she had chosen. That had chosen her back. The ache was still there. The old one, and the deep one. She had come to understand that it would probably always be there, the fingerprint of an early loss. But it no longer ran the show. It no longer got to make the decisions. Something else did now. Something that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like hope that had earned its optimism, like trust that had been built. Carefully, honestly, one Tuesday at a time, on a foundation that actually held. Patrick glanced over from the stove. He caught her watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just looked at her with that honest face and the smile that always took a second to arrive, and she looked back at him, and between them, in that kitchen that smelled like pasta and October and a life they were building together, something quiet and real and completely irreplaceable passed. Rosie looked up from her drawing. Are you two being weird again? She asked. Yes, they said simultaneously. Okay, she said and went back to her dinosaur. If you're still here with us, and thank you truly for staying, I want to say something that isn't part of the story. Or maybe it is. Maybe it's the most important part. Somewhere out there, someone is listening to this, and the part that hit them hardest wasn't the romance. It was the kitchen table at age 9, the 4-sentence note. The way a wound, if you're not careful, can become a worldview. Somewhere out there, someone has built a beautiful, functional, meticulously defended life, and is sitting in it alone, calling it contentment, when the honest word is safety. Somewhere out there, someone has decided, based on very real, very painful evidence that love doesn't stay, that people don't stay, that the smart move is to need less, expect less, feel less. And somewhere out there, someone is still waiting for proof that they were right. Here's what I want to say to that person. You are not broken. The wound that made you careful was real. The people who left, left. The pain was pain. None of that needs to be minimized or spiritualized or rushed past. But the story you built on top of it, that's not fate. That's not prophecy. That's not the truth about who you are or what you deserve. That story can be rewritten. Not by finding the perfect person. Not by having some magical moment of healing where everything that hurts you stops hurting. But by choosing one day at a time to let the right things in. To recognize the difference between a pattern and a person. To understand that being loved well looks nothing like the thing you were afraid of. It looks like a man making pasta on a Thursday. It looks like a little girl who trusts you with her stuffed elephant's backstory. It looks like a phone call you almost didn't make. It looks like ordinary. And it is the most extraordinary thing in the world. Laurel didn't get her fairy tale. She got something better. She got real. And so can you. Thank you for spending this time with us here at Crest Stories. If this story reached something in you, if it sat with you, moved you, reminded you of someone you know or something you've felt, please share it. Not because of the numbers, but because someone in your life might need to hear it today. If you're new here, welcome. And hit subscribe and join a community of people who believe in the power of honest storytelling. Every story we tell is for you. And leave a comment. Tell us what part of Laurel and Patrick's story stayed with you. We read every single one. We'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves.